In the design of a visual document describing any Giudecca, the historical presence of the Jewish community in the area cannot be ignored. This video presenting the Via Giudecca street in Trapani does not escape this consideration either. We are in the ancient district of San Pietro, also known as Casalicchio. We cross it, starting from the marina, until we reach its interior. In front of us there are narrow streets, alleys, courtyards and venues that almost form labyrinths, without any geometric form. The buildings are made of tufa stone and are leaning against each other to dampen the impetuousness of the strong sirocco and libeccio winds and to better resist the vibrations produced by the violence of the earthquakes. In ancient times it comprised two neighborhoods, the Giudecca, also known as I quartaràri vecchi, the old quarters, due to the presence of workshops producing maiolica, tiles, bowls and terracotta bricks, and I biscuitara, due to the concentration of biscuit factories. The courtyards that characterized this area of the city were inhabited by people from the lower classes, whose women were known as courtyards, because of the many disputes that most often ended with exchanges of cooked food between one side and the other. There was no hatred because they were poor, but religious women, always present at the processions of the saints with their children. After the Great War, with the opening of Corso Italia Street, all the old buildings in the northern part of Via Seraglio San Pietro Street were demolished, including Via Tardia Street, and in the southern part, Via Cordogliazzo Street, which started at the corner of Via API Street and ended with a semicurve in Via Giudecca Street. During the fascist period, this street, in homage to the racial policy of the regime, risked losing its historic name in favor of the toponym, Guglielmo Marconi, an operation advocated by an inappropriate anti-Jewish zeal in the press of the time and by the Podesta administration, fortunately never implemented. We are on Via XXX Geneo Street in the direction of Noon. Today there is no sign left of Porta Addi, Porta Golli, Gate, one of the many gates to the city. On the opposite side is Via Bastiona Street, so called to recall the extension of the walls that no longer exist, which is contrasted by Via Merce Street, full of courtyards alternating with noble palaces. In the streets adjacent to the latter, place names recall the presence of Jews in the city, Via Calvano Street with the Cortile Patrasanti Courtyard, Via Cadito Street, Via Orfano Trofeo Street, and Via Orfane Street. Opposite the court is the entrance to Via Giudecca Street, the Jewish quarter, which was once close to the eastern wall. We know this for certain because of the documentation of a dispute between the Jews and the other inhabitants over who should bear the burden of repairing the ruined section of the wall. The Jewish quarter was divided into two areas, one called Lumundazaru de Barakta, the other Mesgidi Judiorum, because of the obvious existence of the synagogue. At the border, near the Mesgidi, was the Platia Saracenorum overlooked by the Church of Jesu Christi, or of the Saviour, which no longer exists. The first Jewish community arrived in Trapani in 70 AD. During the Arab and Norman dominations, and then again under the Swabians and Aragonese, they grew in number and importance. In 1312, with the Edict of Frederick III of Aragon, they were accused of usury and forced to build their houses in a peripheral area of the city, the western part of the nascent Rione Palazzo district, as attested by the documentary existence of a small cemetery just outside the Porta Bottagel gate. Skilled and enterprising in trade, professions and the arts, they established themselves as a wealthy bourgeois class. They were required to wear the red wheel as a distinctive sign, but also to display it in front of the shop. Around 1400, emerging Jewish families inhabited the heart of the medieval city alongside churches and convents in palatial houses adorned with mullioned windows and arched portals. Craftsmen, workers and peasants were housed in the ancient Rione San Pietro district in ground or sunny houses with astracu, around small and large courtyards cum communitate pate, cloche et bilek. They owned their own slaughterhouse, cemetery and prayed in synagogues, maintaining their own traditions and confession. In 1485, the community was concentrated in via Giudecca Street where, taking advantage of the repairs and reinforcement of the city walls, the actual Jewish quarter, or ghetto was built together with the building of the same name. It developed around the synagogue and included via Catito Street, located just behind the Mesgidi, and via Cordogliazzo Street, located in the southern part. The whole neighborhood was intensely populated and showed the typical characteristics of Jewish buildings: low and often unhealthy houses, a few limited spaces, small courtyards, stalls and crossroads. The Jewish presence did not stop at the two streets mentioned above, but continued for the most part in the adjacent streets, in Via Calvano Street, which was called Via de Ferrari Street because of the large number of blacksmiths and farriers' workshops, in Via API Street, Via degli Ebrei Street and Via Sant'Eligio Street and Via Carrara Street. Another street very crowded with workshops and shops, equipped for dyeing clothes, was via Tintory Street. This activity of dyeing cloth was one of the main activities carried out by the island's Jews. Canon Giovanni di Giovanni explains the Jewish presence in Trapani as follows: the many sailing vessels, its noble harbour, its impregnable fortress, the coral fishing, the abundance of fish, the quantity of salt marshes make it known to foreign nations, as well as renowned. And it is here that the Jews, once authorized to establish their residence in Sicily, came to Trapani to stay. The Jews distinguished themselves professionally with the Bulchara, Busacca, Charavino, Chilfa, Cucuzza, Elia, Messina, Romano, Salamone, Sanson and Sierra families. In the field of handicrafts with the Balbo, Raffaele, Greco, Leone and Machaloff families. And in trade with the Cusenza, Mazzara, Rizzo and Sala families. Many of these surnames are found not only in today's families, but also in notarial deeds of the 15th century, which testify to the fervor of the activities carried out by these people, who left their mark on 15th century Trapani through the work of the coral and corallery workshops, with their specialization in ironworking and leather tanning, their skills in carpentry and silk processing, their goldsmiths, their activities linked to the port, salt, tuna fisheries and tuna fishing. Workshops where voices in the Sicilian vernacular mingled with sounds in Maghrebi Arabic. The grandees of this community also stood out for their trade and culture, their ability to make themselves useful to Christian society. They devised matrimonial strategies not dissimilar to those practiced by the Sicilian barons, which allowed them to concentrate their assets and thus to gain contractual power. In any case, they sought the tranquility and security of their home. With regard to economic and financial activities, the banks were concentrated in Jewish hands. The Sala family lived out its glory and power in aristocratic isolation, in its luxurious palace, equipped with a small prayer synagogue, where friends and relatives also went to perform religious rites. Some of them also practiced piracy in lean periods with privateering actions. All this activity over time led to feelings of social hatred on the part of Christians, especially towards the rich Jews who became the object of scorn and massacres from the 15th century onwards. The modern age then began for them with repressive measures reminiscent of the bleak times of recent deportations and discrimination. Just as we have inherited some of our character traits from the Arabs, we have acquired an entrepreneurial spirit and a certain thriftiness from the Jews. In this regard, the dialectal jargon tells of a certain Zusaru Alikasada who, in order to save money, limited himself to licking the salted sardine as a snack, without eating it. Or of another citizen who, on his deathbed, expired after hearing a fishmonger advertising his wares at what he claimed was an exorbitant price. Opi quattro soldi. Un CQ manu. For the Jews, Giudecca was their last stop as they wandered through the city. They used the palace in the street of the same name as a place of worship, which was also the site of a high school for Talmudic studies. The central part of the building was known as the Spedaletto Little Hospital, because the Jews passing through and the sick poor were housed there. The interior of the building was the old synagogue, and the tower of the same name is attached to it. Carlo Guida describes its characteristics as follows: this tower was built in the days when the Gothic style dominated. Due to the deficiency of its entire concatenation, it had to be sheltered by the new buildings that flank it. Although it has suffered greatly, it can be called well preserved from the devouring centuries. It is capable of giving us a scene that speaks of the bizarreness of that northern architecture, decorated with all the beauty and vices, and lightness of its style. Its ashlars, its small windows, some of which are supported by small columns in the middle, its arches, its different ornaments with large rose flowers, heads, diamonds, gashes, and fronts, will characterize the whims and singularity of that style. The two-story building with an ogival portal and a tower is notable for its rich decorative overhang with motifs imitating silver work. It bears witness to the strong links that existed between the Iberian Peninsula and the city, the diamond ashlar covering the tower walls, the filigree stone roses of the moldings, the richly decorated window and doorway displays reveal an adherence to the Plateresque or Palatine style of the 12th century. It would have been built by the Sala family of bankers in 1485 on the site of an old building. Later, the Catalan nobleman Chambra bought many buildings in the neighborhood, most recently this palace, which has since been called Palazzo Chambra. Numerous coats of arms of the family are evident on the facade, a deer barking under an oak tree, and the motto Virtus et Solicitudo, which are still legible despite their deplorable state of disrepair. Little remains of the original splendor. The wall structure, built with ashlars of tufa mixed with limestone and red bricks, is in a dangerous state for the safety of passers-by due to the instability of some of the high cornices. In a recent period, the facade suffered significant damage due to the opening of 4 entrances to facilitate the division into flats overlooking a garden at the back of Piazzetta Catito Square. Another important building was the 15th century Palazzo Emanuele, which no longer exists. The same fate befell the chapel of the Jesu Christi or Saviour. It was an ancient synagogue transformed into a Latin church in 1230, located at the present corner of Via Giudecca Street and Via degli Ebrei Street. The Dominican fathers, returning from the Holy Land, settled there for a decade. Today, only one sign remains on the corner, the stone marker of the Blessed Sacrament that was used to display the name of the church where, from time to time, the circular quarantines for Catholics were held. Sicily has always been a thriving place for the reception and integration of peoples who conquered or fled their homeland. Trapani was home to the second largest Jewish community on the island. It was always considered to have a bad reputation, greedy, guilty of atrocious wickedness, bribery and cheating at the expense of honest citizens who saw gold, jewelry and valuables of all kinds stolen from them as if by magic. He is said to have accumulated immeasurable wealth, believed to be the result of wicked actions against the city's assets, a fortune that was kept well hidden due to greed. After his expulsion from the city in 1492, many of these treasures were confiscated and returned. But there was public suspicion that much of their wealth had in fact been secretly stored. These rumors soon fed fabulous legends about the mysterious spells the Jews allegedly cast on their treasures to make them invisible. Legend has it that only they knew the formula for undoing these spells. He therefore began a veritable treasure hunt, using every means to unearth some of these riches, fruitlessly, so much so that he thought that only a magical ritual could undo the spell of his visibility. This ritual, known as spignatura, a term that indicates the action of removing the pledge, is a kind of impossible operation. In fact, since it is secret, it is not known what it consists of. Perhaps it is a set of magical practices, such as reciting ritual formulas by heart, the words, actions and execution times of which would have to be marked out with extreme precision. Otherwise it would not succeed. To this day, the enchanted treasure of the Jews of Trapani appears only as a town legend, but in truth, Jewish culture has already proven to be an ancient form of enlightened wisdom. Saverio Catania told 2 stories of neighborhood life observed from the same street corner. The first one expresses sacredness. When the Corpus Christi procession reached the 4 Giudecca chants, it stopped and the archpriest, after a short homily, blessed all those present at the foot of a small altar previously prepared in front of the effigy of the Blessed Sacrament carved in the stone at the corner of Via Giudecca Street and Via degli Ebrei Street. My brother and I were very happy, because the religious ceremony took place right under our house. The second is profane. On the corner of Via Giudecca Street and Via degli Ebrei Street, I often saw American soldiers, also black, standing in a line in front of a small door, waiting to go upstairs. Someone was holding an American dollar, a currency I had never seen, which corresponded to the price paid to the women who lived on the floors, women who lived on the upper floors, in exchange for the services in kind, I learned later, provided by them. More recently, on the 28th of November 2013, the old Jewish quarter came back to life for one day only. Young people, students, rituals, tastings, music and traditional Jewish dances turned the spotlight back on the neighborhood, which has buildings in poor condition and where the cobblestones are still covered by asphalt. So, on the day of the Jewish festival Hanukkah, Festival of Lights, an initiative organized by various associations and the collaboration of the old shops in the area was held. Renato Alonghi, one of the promoters, said, "This initiative is the beginning of a process for the redevelopment and enhancement of Giudecca. Among other things, we will ask for the recovery of the paving stones and incentives to open craft shops and spaces dedicated to the various artistic expressions." The recipe for revitalizing and repopulating an old town in agony has as its ingredients the reactivation of craft activities and the old pizzicagnoli. Having the basic necessities available is fundamental for the inhabitants to be able to return to a neighborhood. If, on the other hand, we focus exclusively on bars, restaurants, pizzerias and luxury shops, all we will have achieved is an open-air shopping center, certainly not an inhabited historic center that needs to be revived.